Hello, everybody. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. I hope you're all very well today. It's a concerning day because we're having a very scary situation in the Middle East. Unfortunately, wisdom and patience and love are losing out to anger and hatred and violence. And when we meditate and contemplate on the causes of all the calamities that we face, we can trace them all back to the poisons of the mind. You can blame violence on weapons and bombs and politicians and armies, but if you look deeper behind that, you'll see that the motivating forces behind all of those entities is hatred, jealousy, and anger, pride, ignorance. So at times of war, at times of difficulty, sometimes we feel there's nothing we can do. But if we do our spiritual practice and we try to purify our own ignorance, our own anger, our own attachment, our own jealousy, our own pride, there's nothing better that we can do to contribute to the end of these kind of wars. And of course, this is samsara. Since the beginning of samsara, there's been war, hatred, violence, and there will be until samsara ends. It's because beings here are driven by confusion. So, of course, tonight we dedicate our practice to peace, not only in Ukraine, but also in the Middle East and wherever else war has broken out or is in danger of breaking out. And interestingly, we are contemplating Rinpoche's answers specifically about the power of prayer. The question here is, Rinpoche, can we change an outward situation by perceiving it differently? If something negative happens to me or someone else, how can I act with compassion to transform the harm into benefit? Rinpoche said, according to our karma, many different circumstances manifest in our lives. By meeting them with compassion, we don't necessarily change the circumstances themselves, but rather our experience of them. The next question is, abused women are often told that their situation isn't so bad and that others suffer worse. This discourages. One source of people's immediate suffering is their helplessness. When battered women come to you, affirm to them their ability to change things. Help them see that they have choices. There are people and resources they can rely on for support. Their situation is quite different than that of someone with terminal cancer or someone in a war zone. The next question is, in my limited understanding of Eastern spiritual traditions, I sense there's a more positive view on things. But what I'm discovering in this training is a strong emphasis on suffering. I can listen to scary teachings about hell in church already. How does one integrate the topic of suffering with other in a more upbeat aspect of the teachings? Rinpoche said, this brings up an extremely important point. It can be uncomfortable to contemplate the problems, confusion, and anguish of life. It's much easier to focus on positive things like peace and contentment. With so much reference to suffering in the media, we suffer simply from hearing about it. But once we acknowledge the extent and depth of pain in the world, we will naturally want to do whatever is necessary to help ourselves and others. Many people criticize Buddhism for its teachings on the misery not only of humans but of all beings. Yet we need to know about suffering so that we can liberate ourselves and others. The Buddha taught that life is full of suffering, but he also taught that suffering has a cause, and if we eliminate that cause, suffering will come to an end. If a sick person acknowledges her illness, she will go to a doctor and take the medicine he prescribes. But if she ignores it, thinking it's not important or that she has no time to deal with it, she won't be able to take care of anyone or anything, much less herself, and the illness will only grow worse. There would be no point in thinking about the sickness if it was incurable. Similarly, pretending that there is no suffering will not liberate us. But by looking suffering squarely in the face and finding its cause, we gain freedom from it. Suffering is one of 4 topics we contemplate in order to make the best use of this life. Precious human birth, impermanence, karma, and suffering are known as the 4 thoughts that transform the mind. They are like special ingredients in a unique recipe for change. They can remove any obstacle and bring unwavering qualities to our spiritual practice. If we have a tendency to feel sad and depressed, lamenting that everything about our life is unacceptable, we can find encouragement by recognizing the preciousness of this life. Contemplating the impermanence of the objects of our desire is an antidote for our greed and grasping. If we are overwhelmed by suffering, contemplating the suffering of others helps us realize our good fortune and develop compassion. When nothing makes sense and everything seems unfair and we feel ineffective, we must remember karma. On a more subtle level, thinking about impermanence relaxes our tendency to hold on to the apparent truth of outer appearances. When we combine this with the contemplation of the precious human birth, we understand the necessity of changing our priorities in this life. And contemplating karma and the pervasiveness of suffering loosens our attachment to samsara. When we contemplate the 4 thoughts, we start to see that much of what we do is based on wishful thinking. We begin to appreciate the urgency of our situation and turn away from negative thoughts and actions, just as we would avoid a harmful diet if we get sick. Like putting gas in a car to make it run, contemplating the 4 thoughts fuels our enthusiasm for the spiritual path. It counteracts our false contentment, laziness, and procrastination. It also helps us clarify our goal, for it will become evident that any short-term benefit is unreliable, and that to benefit all beings ceaselessly, we must thoroughly uproot the causes of suffering in our own mind as well as in others. Samsara is a state of perpetual suffering. Enlightenment is a state that's possible beyond suffering, and they are not so far apart. Whether we experience one or the other depends on whether we know the truth of reality. And we come to recognize that truth through meditation. Meditation doesn't just mean resting the mind in a void, fighting off concepts. It can help us develop both a deeper conceptual understanding of spiritual truths, such as the 4 thoughts, and non-dual wisdom. Genuine meditation gives rise to a knowing quality that will make our work more effective and more beneficial.